On the last case, I got a pretty bad bug and was bedridden for a few days. Nick checked in on me twice to ensure I was actually resting. When he was busy with other jobs and was unable to come in person, he recruited Jimmy to drop by and she caught me out of bed trying to make myself some soup. Having your employee over at your house and making you dinner has to be crossing some sort of line. I should remember to pay her for the time she spent over helping out. A few days later, I finally recovered and was ready to check in on my office, only to have Nick come by with a case folder in hand. We spotted each other outside my apartment and I gave him a wave and walked over. "Hey Snickety, what's going on?" I said. I was running really low on new nicknames for him. "I believe you're just making up words now," he replied, without a hint of humor. "I'll admit that one wasn't my best. I should just stick with Snickerdoodle. I made the mistake of using the best one first." He didn't dwell on it and handed me the folder to look at as we walked, and he spoke. "This case may be dealing with certain creatures that humans find troublesome and uncomfortable to discuss. You do not need to accept this job, and you may step out at any point." It was the first time I've ever heard something like this. Whatever we were up against must be a very big deal for Nicky to warn me ahead of time. He didn't even bother warning me about how gruesome a nest could be. If I had managed to get through insects making a human their hive, then I would probably be fine with whatever else gets thrown my way. "Don't worry about Nick. I think I can handle it." He paused, debating on whether he really wanted to take me along. So far, the case folder only held photos and names of people who were found drained of energy and sent to the hospital. No injuries or anyone torn apart. It all appeared pretty mild. He remained silent and then stopped walking, causing me to almost knock him over by running into his back. "The corporation believes there is a succubus on the loose," he finally said. That was it. Looking up at my partner, his face didn't look flustered or really affected by the topic. I didn't understand why he was making such a big deal out of it, unless there was something about succubi I didn't know. As far as I was aware, they just seduced men, right? "I really don't mind talking about a sexy demon girl, Nikki," I said, still not understanding the issue. "I suppose it's the nature of the creature most are reluctant to talk about, let alone deal with." This case was offered to a few teams, but all passed on it fearing they would not be able to handle being around such a creature without incident. He explained. "How many sets of partners passed on it before you got a hold of this?" I asked. Nick held up both open hands wide and flashed his fingers twice. 20 sets of partners refused this case. I took a second to think about it. I didn't know that I could control myself around something like that, but I end up doing something really embarrassing. I would hate it if we were trying to get a creature under control and from harming others and I wasn't focused on the task, but instead drooling over an attractive girl. Thinking back to all the cute girls I've come across, I hated myself a little over the fact that it might be a real possibility. I barely could focus when Fina came into my office wearing a very small piece of cloth and nothing else. Not because I was ready to jump her, but because I didn't know where to look. Honestly, I got embarrassed easily by girls, but never outright turned on to the point my brain stopped working. Nick was really the best person for a job like this. He never looked at a girl in that way. No blushing, no stumbling over his words. He'd never even looked at a guy like that either. Come to think about it, did Nick look at anyone with a romantic interest ever? If we run into a succubus and I'm having issues, then you can slap me across the face until I smarten up. I'm guessing if we don't deal with this soon, people are going to keep getting hurt. She might not stop at only weakening her victims for much longer. And God only knows when she'll come across someone with a bad heart. This needed to be dealt with right now. One of us would keep a clear head no matter what. Who knew how long we had before things took a turn for the worst? It was a good thing Nick found this case for us to take care of before it kept getting passed around. Rogue succubi must not be an ongoing problem for there not to already have a special agent assigned to such cases. We'll first go by an incubus's place to ask questions. They are gender-fluid creatures from what I've heard. He tends to stay in a male body and prefers male pronouns. Succubus and incubus are the same creatures. They just switch depending on their partner. His whereabouts have been confirmed, so it is unlikely he's behind any of this. However, he may know of others in the area. Nick explained a little more as he guided us to my apartment again. Now I would have never expected that information. It made sense. If they gain energy from sleeping around, changing their bodies to suit any kind of preference would ensure they always got what they needed. Even after everything I had already gone through, I learned something new about the supernatural every other day. I could be doing this job for 100 years and still be learning something new. Nick didn't have enough energy for a transportation spell, but he did have the right key for the connecting doors spell. My apartment door was the only one he already had permission to use. He could use any door, but that cost more magic when you didn't have permission. So much more it wasn't worth ever barging into someone's place. He took a key from his pocket and placed it into the lock. It was a long iron skeleton key that shouldn't have fit. He turned it once and opened the door. Inside was not my place, but something resembling a fortune teller's tent. The air smelled so heavily of perfume my eyes watered without even walking inside. I literally needed to suck it up and follow behind my partner. The room was dimly lit with purple light. The air was warm and heavy, making my head swim. Each surface was soft and plush. A person sitting at a table near the far side of the room stood up to greet us. His arms were outstretched and he had a perfect smile on his face. He looked totally human aside from how handsome he was. Everything from his flowing pale hair to his tanned skin not exactly hidden under transparent silks. Oh my goodness, agents. I haven't had any drop by in such a long time. Come along, tell me what you like. I do discounts for ones from your lovely company. The man exclaimed in a soft, wispy voice. I was unable to reply, trying to get over the heavy air. Nick's face was as stiff as ever. He didn't respond in the slightest to the man's appearance or the strange air. He remained completely stone-faced as the man scooped his hands into his own. We are on a case. What happened made me snap out of my dizzy state and let out a shocked squeak. The man leaned down and kissed Nick before my partner could stop him. I fretted, worried about what would happen to him. After all, being touched, let alone kissed by an incubus, was a bad thing, right? After the worry came a wave of anger over just how rude it was to do something like that without any kind of permission. The creature pulled away, expecting some sort of reaction only to receive nothing. As I was saying, we are on a case and would like to speak with you if possible, Nick said without his tone of voice changing in the slightest. At least my partner was fine and had no reaction to the kind of creature we were dealing with. The incubus just stood there, mouth open in complete shock. He simply didn't understand how Nick had just brushed him off. He'd never gotten a reaction like that before, and I could see his world starting to internally crumble around him. You just... nothing. There was no way that was nothing. What spell are you using? Circling Nick, he started to look to see if he could sense some sort of magic. When he spotted me, he jumped back as if I smacked him. And you? Your eyes should be all glazed over just being here. Don't I do anything for you? No, I prefer girls. About this case, that was the wrong thing to say. As if I just told him an answer to a difficult question, his perfect face lit up. Before our eyes, his body changed to a very beautiful woman, the clothing not leaving much to the imagination. I expected myself to be more flustered, to the point where I needed to leave. I found if I just stared at her face, I would be fine. This should be more like it. Now, let's talk about the case, Nick interrupted, with a scream of frustration. He shifted back to the male form, distraught over who just walked into his place. I almost felt bad for the guy. Glancing over, I could tell Nicky was getting slightly agitated, and that wasn't like him at all. He was normally so calm about everything. I felt something from the little one. Why weren't you trying to jump me as a girl? I don't understand either of you. My air should be doing something. With a long sigh, I figured if we didn't address this first, we would get nowhere. I don't get worked up over girls I don't care about. I might get a little flustered over someone cute, but I'm a 3-date kind of guy before anything happens. I just assume it's normal not to want to sleep with someone unless you're into them very much, I said with a shrug. Dude, people don't need to like each other to get hot and heavy. They don't even need to know each other. You two aren't really normal. Wait, was that right? It was a fact I knew, but never thought about it until it was shoved in my face. How did I never notice that about myself? That I could never get worked up over a stranger. I shook my head, not wanting to get into such personal details with someone who didn't respect either of us. Either way, it doesn't matter. We came for a case, not for your services. And don't go saying we're not normal because you've never come across something like this before. It's rude. I was very close at walking out the door to try and find a different source for this case. I could take someone insulting me to my face, but no one was mean to my partner. Nick was silent, letting me take over the conversation. He was either hoping I knew how to bring it around to what we needed to know, or at a loss for words himself. It's weird. At least you like something, but your partner really isn't into anything. Nothing at all. Does he know for sure? Has he ever even just tried it to see? Without trying it, how do you really know? My face flushed in rage and my arm shot out with a quick punch to the incubus's shoulder. To my shock, Nick and I had the same idea as his hand flew out at the same time. I almost felt bad for lashing out like that. But then again, that comment was so offensive he deserved it. I just never saw Nick get upset over something someone said about him, only to defend others. I wondered if I was having a bad influence on my partner, or if Nick standing up for himself was a good thing. That double punch hit some sense into the incubus. Rubbing his arms, he nodded, realizing his mistake. Sorry, that was pretty rude. I've never come across someone like you two and didn't think it was possible. The incubus apologized. I understand, but I am not apologizing. That was another statement that shocked me. Nick said sorry for everything. You didn't really need to do much to get one out of him. He was ready to drop the whole thing to get back to the case, but refused to apologize for landing a punch. We finally could get to the reason of why we had come. The incubus changed into some clothing that covered him a bit more and directed Nick and I to sit at a table so we could talk. He introduced himself as Maru, and we gave him our names. From how rocky our first conversation was, we got back on track easily enough. Nick laid out the files to ask if Maru knew of any succubus in the area that might be the cause behind the number of humans found drained of energy recently. Well, I guess this is something one of our kind could do, but most likely wouldn't. We don't overlap territory like this. With all the restrictions put into place, our interactions with humans are very closely recorded. If we don't follow that, the punishment is way beyond anything we could gain by the extra meals. The only other succubus that hangs around here is my sibling. She tends to stay in a female body, so I call her my sister. We can be in the same territory because she only interacts with max 5 humans at a time, like having 5 ongoing relationships. I, on the other hand, open shop to welcome anyone who walks in for service. Nick did say he doubted Maru was behind what was going on due to his movements being so closely followed. It must be tough trying to just live while being watched for any mistakes. If a succubus or an incubus was behind these events, then the corporation should be aware of it already. The only way they wouldn't be is if it was a succubus they had missed and wasn't registered with them. One could give their entire species a bad name, so if Maru knew about it, he would definitely tell us. Nick pulled out a photo from the file folder and placed it in front of Maru. Do you think one of your species can do something like this? He asked. The photo was of a shriveled up corpse. It made my skin crawl a little. Back when I was younger, I got really into mummies. Somehow it was easier to look at them when you knew the person died thousands of years ago instead of someone who lived fairly recently. Maru's face paled a little and he nodded. It's extreme, but yes, we can do that. We always stop ourselves before it gets this far. After all, if a human lives for another day, we can get another meal from them. It makes no sense to get one big meal if you can get several from the same source, he said, pushing the photo back a little. In a way, his kind was dangerous. But overall, they preferred to work with humans instead of killing them. If there was an incubus or a succubus on the loose, then it would be a bit of a big deal. They could kill if they wanted, and it would be difficult for any agent other than myself and Nick to deal with it, or by others that weren't affected by their powers. Judging from how much this case had bounced around, the people that could manage that were rare in the corporation. I figured Ankar was stronger than a succubus, but would be useless against one. If the creature we were facing was more powerful than us, we may not have any backup. So far, this is the only death we could find. It's only a matter of time until more happen. Are you aware of a method of drawing some of your kind to a certain spot? Nick asked, trying to figure out a way to stop all this before someone else died. Aside from having a lot of worked up people in one spot, no. We're only attracted by that kind of energy, and we grow stronger around it, so it would be best not to use that method. With how you two are, it would be almost impossible for any of my kind to be drawn to you. But if you could find the one doing this, we are pretty weak against binding spells. If we're not under contract, there isn't much we can do against one if one is forced on us. In fact, I got lucky about a week ago. Some human dabbling in dark magic was a jerk trying to get me over to his place and become his sex slave. Ugh, how gross. Maru sounded equally as proud of himself for avoiding such a fate as he was disgusted over the human who attempted to bind him in such a way. Nick looked down at the photos on the desk. He moved one to read a date at the top of the folder, and the information they dug up about the only human found dead so far. The glance was quick and I almost missed the movement. He'd put something together I just hadn't yet. About a week ago, you say? Nick asked, giving me enough time to fit the pieces into place. Maru still hadn't realized it. Yeah. I kicked him in the nuts and stormed off. I think his name was Garvis Jane, Maru said, with his arms crossed. Nick lifted the photo of the mummy again, silently telling us what he figured out. After a pause, Maru understood. His face flushed in rage and he stood up, furious over the dead man's actions. That bastard got to my sister. I would kill him a second time if I could. For a moment he looked about, ready to storm off to find the body and take out some of his anger on it. After Garvis failed getting Maru under his control, he turned to the sister. She was the one going rogue. If the person who contracted her was dead, then why was she still out ambushing people? Was whatever contract on her not over just because the one who made it had died? At least we now knew what was going on and could figure out a way forward. When the incubus grew even paler from fear, I got worried. He dove at the files, reading them over, trying to add up just how many humans his sister had harmed so far. Maru, what's up? I asked, hoping we hadn't just gained another problem. For a second, his face flushed from the shortened name. No one had ever called him a nickname before, even if it was just a shorter version of his own name. He quickly got over it and dropped a bomb on us that made the entire thing so much worse. My sister and I are different. We may be the only two left of what we are. We were created from a regular succubus by a religious leader a few hundred years ago who was disgusted by sex in general. He only thought it was acceptable if it was done to create life and not enjoyed in the slightest. We gather energy and magic created from being with humans in that way. If we gain too much, we explode, taking the world out with us. In his eyes, if no one sinned, then the world wouldn't be at risk. Yeah, this was bad. We all got up, ready to track down his sister before it was too late. She'd already been at this for a week. There was no telling just how much more energy she needed to collect before the world was done for. And besides all that, I wanted to save her. I didn't believe this was what she wanted. She only took on a few partners at a time. From what I could tell from the files, whatever Garvis did to her caused her to go for anyone who crossed her path. End of the world aside, this was just wrong. The attacks have been clustered in this area. Do you believe there is one spot she is more likely to stay around? Nick asked, pointing to a small map he had within the files. Maru looked and pointed to a small spot, his face showing just how worried he was for his sister. Right here. She loves this park. It's the spot where she met most of her partners. Whatever spell she's under might be messing with her mind, but I think her heart would direct her here. Nick nodded and headed towards the door, leaving the papers behind since he no longer needed them. I followed behind, wondering how we could help her. I couldn't do any magic, let alone break a spell. And Nick wasn't the best at magic either. Maru was behind us, but then suddenly put himself between us and the door. His arms were out, trying to block us the best he could. You're both agents. I don't want the world to end, but I know your type. Killing is the easiest way to solve a problem. If I lose Babette, then it would be as if my world was over. His normally perfect face was flushed with tears. Without his powers affecting us, he couldn't do anything. He knew that, and yet he put himself in front of people he assumed to be killers. I respected him, knowing I would do the same for my sister. I'm a contract worker, not an agent, so I can do whatever I want. And we tend to do things the hard way, I said with a smile I hoped would be comforting. He waited a few seconds, expecting what I said to be a lie. Maru finally relaxed a little when he accepted that we were willing to work together to get his sister out of this entire mess. He demanded to go with us, which was easily agreed on. He was the best person to find his sister. I was glad other agents had passed on this case. I would hate to think of what would have happened to Babette if they hadn't. Maru was able to make a transportation circle to get us all to the park quickly. The sun had already set by the time we arrived, making looking for her a bit difficult. Maru directed us to the pond where he knew his sister liked to feed the ducks. I was the slowest runner, so was left behind for a few minutes until I could catch up with them. By the time I got to the pond, I missed a little of what had happened. Maru's guess was right as to where his sister may be. In front of the small pond was a girl wearing a nearly transparent white dress. In the dark, she appeared almost like a beautiful ghost. Her long pale hair was nearly glowing and her eyes were unfocused. Neither of them approached her just yet. Maru wanted to either try and talk some sense into her, or wanted to see just how far gone she was. Nick placed himself in between myself and the scene despite us being a few feet from her. He wasn't aware of her powers and honestly didn't even want me around something so dangerous. She looks fine. I think we avoided an apocalypse, I said, a little bit winded from running so far. Maru let out a startled noise, his entire body turning on me with a terrible expression on his face. I wanted to ask him what was wrong but didn't get the chance. Babette's body twitched. Something was happening to her that we didn't have any idea about. Nick grabbed a hold of me and jumped back just as light started to spark out from the girl. Maru grew large bat wings to fly out of danger. Before our eyes, the small girl was turning into something else. Wind came from her, and light blinded us from the transformation. The force nearly tore off all the leaves from all the trees within a 1-mile radius. I couldn't breathe for a long while and thought I might suffocate. The wind died down before that happened. Surviving being so close to her as she transformed was the first hurdle. We now needed to figure out how to deal with whatever she had become. In front of us was a monster so large it dwarfed the trees. The face was a thing of beauty, but the body was so bone-chilling it was hard to look at even for a few seconds. Exposed ribs could be seen, the insides a twisted mess of vines with thorns. Countless arms moved from her back, making up a shape somewhat like wings. Long tangled hair reached down to wrap anything it touched. Her bottom half was hidden under layers of cloth made from scraps of fabric. Honestly, what Babette had become was more of an endgame boss than what we had ever needed to deal with before. Vines snapped out from under her ribs and came right for us. Nick went into action, his hands swiftly bringing out the orchestra and cutting away those vines before they touched us. For every one he cut, 10 more took its place. He was standing in front of his weaker partner trying to protect me from the attacks. A vine slipped over his shoulder, grazing my face, and sliced my cheek open just as Nick cut it away. I assured him I was fine as more came towards us. It appeared to be a losing battle. Normally the orchestra could topple buildings, but the shockwaves that hit Babette were healed the moment they cut her. Maru came crashing back down to earth. He spoke some words with force and a light appeared. The vines bounced off it, protecting the three of us for a while. He was breathing hard, showing he needed to recover for a few minutes. What happened? Why did she turn into this? I asked him, shocked. We both have a keyword that causes us to transform if we cross a certain stored energy threshold. The one who made us was impatient and wanted to be able to take out small countries if he couldn't gather enough energy to end the world. He said in a grave tone. I was the one who slipped up and said the wrong word, triggering all of this. We might have had a chance if Bebe stayed in her normal form. Neither of them would blame me. Nick quickly brought out my holster, handing it over with 5 magazines this time. He often forgot to give me my gun until we needed it. We had only been going to get information before the park and he didn't expect me to need a weapon. And when I caught up to them, we didn't have time for an exchange. He also said his phone wasn't working, so we couldn't even call for backup. All 3 of us were facing a world-ending creature without a plan or additional help. We need to drain her of all her energy. We only have an hour before she self-destructs. The one who made us assumed that would be enough time to get away if he ever needed to use us. Maru said, looking up at his changed sister. The vines kept attacking us, and his shield was starting to show cracks. We didn't have that much time to think of a plan. Creatures use energy if they heal right. Would we be able to do enough damage to stop her and yet not kill her? I asked, and Maru shook his head. I doubt it. I won't be able to last very long out there, unless you have insanely powerful bullets in that thing. Then the attacks you were doing before would take days to use up her strength by healing, if you could even live that long. We were in a tight spot. Looking at Nick, I silently asked him if he brought along any of those crazy powerful bullets with him. He shook his head. I was disappointed. They were far too strong to use and risked our lives if we did. But if we were going to die anyway, I would rather try and save Bebe. A new idea came to mind. The blood coming down my cheek was bothering me. I tried cleaning it the best I could while I spoke and only got my hands dirty. Mickey, you said you could absorb supernatural things. Do they really need to be dead? I asked, hopeful. They do. I've never been able to absorb anything else. Even if I could, I would be unable to store how much she currently has. He said, killing my idea. You couldn't just absorb it and put it into a harmless spell at the same time. Maru asked, sounding tense at how many more cracks were appearing in our protection. Nick looked at him, then back towards me. A plan was forming in his mind. For some reason, I didn't like it. The only time he had absorbed anything not dead was on the twin lizard case. What he had turned into then wasn't himself. I never wanted to see him like that again. From what I could see, he was considering it. I didn't even think he knew how to use that power, let alone let himself change like that on a whim. On the lizard case, he started and I stopped him. Nikki, we can't. Whatever that power is, it's bad news, I said, but he went on. Abarash has theories about that power and how to use it. Before I blacked out, I saw red at the edge of my vision. It's happened a few other times, but I've been able to force it back. I assume if I am injured, that state will try and take over in order to protect my life. The theory is, that power is myself turning closer to a stone. If I'm a stone, then I am a tool. You'll be able to use me. I kept shaking my head, never wanting to hear those words. In that moment, I would rather die than ever seeing Nick like that, or even thinking about using my partner. It wasn't just my life though. I was Nick's, and Maru's, and even Bebe's at risk. Not to mention how many people she might kill if we didn't stop her. What we needed to do was let Nick get hurt. From how our wall was looking, that was going to happen soon. We didn't have any other choices. Either die or try and use Nick. I don't like this, I replied regretfully. Whatever it is, you need to decide in the next 5 seconds. Maru turned away from us, his body ready to lift back up into the sky once the wall was broken. I pulled my gun from the holster, ready to fire. My job was to last long enough for Nick to let himself get hurt badly enough that his other power activate. It was a big risk. We were working off of theories, not facts. Neither of us really knew if he could let himself change in time, if at all. When the wall of light broke and vines came crashing through, nothing else mattered. I fired my gun, doing my best to take out anything trying to cut my body to pieces. Nick doing his best to stay in front and swung his sword to cut down the danger. Maru was also doing what he could. He flew, dodging attacks and throwing out some of his own. Each hit that landed was healed quickly after. During the chaos of the fight, my head turned too slowly. I saw a ball of dark purple light just before it hit. Nick tried cutting it away, just for it to travel through the shockwave and directly into me. The world turned dark as I suddenly could feel and see nothing. My eyes opened to a sight I never wanted to see. The sky appeared red in the night as everything was so silent. Those vines got a hold of Nick, wrapping his limp body in the air. So many of the thorns were digging into him and blood seeped through his clothes. I screamed, attempting to rush forwards. My feet refused to move and my gun was missing. This couldn't be happening. I refused to believe it. I wanted to look away, but my eyes remained glued at the sight as those vines started to pull and tear at the person I cared so much about. Just as his body was ripped apart and scattered, my own felt as if I was falling. My sight became unfocused. When I could see again, I looked around only to find the same horrible event play out again. I was trapped inside a nightmare of seeing my partner die over and over again. My mind knew this, and yet I still couldn't calm down. Fear ripped through my body every time the scene ended, knowing I would have to watch it all over again. Finally, I was able to break through the loop. Crying, I placed my hands over my ears, drowning out the sound of blood dripping. I begged to see something, anything but that. The nightmare listened. Instead of being forced to watch Nick be ripped apart, I was forced in front of an endless field scattered with bodies of everyone I've come to know, each of them killed in the most brutal of ways. I nearly snapped. Anyone might have after all of that. I was on my hands and knees, and tears were clouding my vision. I felt the mud slick with blood covering my hands. It was soaking through my jeans and making me feel dirty and guilty. I grit my teeth, trying my best to pull free from the spell. The ground rumbled and I looked up. My wet eyes were making it impossible to see in the distance for a few seconds. Giant beasts were moving towards me. Their bodies were made up of claws, mouths, and spider legs. Each step shook the ground from just how big they were. The tears threatened to come back, biting down on the inside of my mouth until I tasted blood. I shut my eyes tight, staying in darkness. A deep rage started bubbling up from my stomach. It was taking over my entire body. Soon the tears weren't from fear but from how pissed off I was. On shaking legs, I stood up. My entire body was shaking, with the footsteps getting ever closer. "Oh, fuck off," I shouted as loud as I could. Something cracked. The sounds cut out, and I felt wind blowing across my face. I was no longer trapped inside whatever nightmare I was in a few seconds ago, but was instead being carried by Nick. He'd placed me on his back and was jumping around, avoiding the vines going after us. He turned to look over his shoulder to see if I was awake and recovering. I really hoped I didn't just shout at him. Maru flew over, face flushed from dodging attacks for so long. "You escaped a nightmare. Good job. Don't get hit again." He was unable to stay long. He flew off to distract his sister away from us as best he could. Keeping a grip on Nick's shoulder, I looked him over. His face was cut and his suit jacket was in tatters from the thorns. He didn't get torn apart, but he was still hurt. While I was out, he'd taken all the attacks head on, using his body as a shield. "How's your vision?" I asked over the sounds of the battle, seeing a little bit of red. He replied in an even tone as he jumped out of the way. This was now or never. More of those balls of light shot out. It would only take one of them to hit Nick for it to be all over. I couldn't defend him if he fell into a nightmare. Maru was losing speed. This battle was almost over if we didn't pull out our trump card. We risked letting so many lives end. I took a deep breath, ready for whatever would happen next. "All right, you can give in. No matter what, I'll be here." I only saw my partner give a small nod with his head. He ran along the vines until he was pretty high in the air and jumped. As we fell towards the monster and the countless vines shooting through the air ready to kill us, his hair changed. It broke free of the elastic holding it back. My stomach was fluttering in fear and anxiety. The first time I'd seen Nick like this, his hair turned into a darker red and almost glowed. This time, it swayed free as if underwater. Near the bottom it was shining a brighter red than the rest. I was now unable to see his face. And the vines headed our way never reached us. They disappeared in a red light as if being burned away. We were risking his life, and Bebes. I didn't want to regret what we were doing. We kept going, falling through the set of exposed ribs and inside the monster. The swarm of vines trying to get at us and burning away just before they touched us. Nick grabbed onto a single vine and held it firmly in his hand. I felt something then. There were no words, just a rattling in my brain. A question of what to. I mentally answered to drain away her magic, but just enough to still leave her alive and well. The moment the process started to happen, I was overwhelmed. My body was slammed with intense pain. It was similar to being on a roller coaster, but one going far too fast for the human body to handle. Every nerve fired off at once, and my organs felt as if they were getting compressed. I heard a girl screaming. This wasn't only my pain, but what Bebe was feeling. By ripping her magic away, we were hurting her. I never wanted this. If I could take all the pain onto myself so she wouldn't feel it, I would. I fooled myself into thinking we shared half the burden. Another wordless question came. A query of what to do with all this magic. I couldn't think of anything and mentally told Nick to do whatever he wanted, only to have him ask again. While in his near-stone state, he was unable to think for himself. Everything hurt. It was impossible to focus on detailed thoughts. I couldn't think of anything to turn this magic into. My body was nearing its limits. I would not last the next few minutes. The fear of death was clouding my thoughts along with all the pain. I vaguely remember thinking that Nick should use the magic to make something nice, something he would enjoy. By some miracle, that answer was enough. The magic he collected had already shot out, turning into something else. I blacked out before the process was complete, unable to glimpse what he had created from the magic we stole. Maru was the one who woke me up. He was lightly tapping my cheek and the sun was rising. He helped me to sit up and I wondered where we were. The place was covered in golden flowers that gave off a dim light. My body was still sore, but not as bad as I expected. I reached up to check on the cut on my face to find it gone. Maru was also looking fine. "Is Nick?" I asked, my voice hoarse and still recovering. "Over there resting. I was knocked out of the sky and woke up near to you." Maru explained. We both went over to Nick to see that he did not end up as well as us. His hands were terribly burned, but aside from that it didn't appear like he had suffered too many side effects. We both helped him sit up. Maru then went looking for any sign of his sister. Nick was barely keeping his eyes open when the incubus found her hidden in the golden flowers. When we noticed she lacked any clothing, Nick quickly gave up his suit jacket for her to have something to wear. Maru gratefully took it, near tears to see his sister was somehow still alive, just a bit sleepy. We need to call for someone to clear the scene, Nick said as he stood up, his voice also strained. He was going to go on, but my partner suddenly turned pale, turning away without a word. He went beside a tree to do something I never thought he would. He threw up some sort of black sludge for a few minutes. I tried comforting him and patted his back, unaware of what to do. I've never even seen him eat anything. What on earth was inside his stomach? When the sludge hit the ground, it faded in the sunlight, starting to cover over the trees. My best guess was he was getting sick from any leftover magic. I called for backup that arrived fairly quickly. They needed to ensure the scene was no longer dangerous and confirmed that the new golden flowers were harmless things made from magic. Nick sat against the tree, still pale but not getting sick anymore. His hands were showing no sign of healing as one agent started to wrap them for him. They also brought along real clothing for Bebe. She was able to approach us after getting changed, suit jacket folded in her hands. I opened my mouth to apologize for the pain we caused, but she started speaking with a red face and tears in her eyes. "Thank you for saving me," she said, looking as if she was about to cry. "We just happened to be a pair of beings that found it easier to save her than kill her. If a different set of agents had taken the job, a completely different outcome would have happened, and she knew that." She straightened up and I took the jacket from her and thanked her. To my horror, I noticed something when I was seeing her clearly for the first time. She was cute, super cute, totally my type. Shy, round face, and big golden eyes. I've never been so struck by someone's appearance since first laying eyes on Abarash. I cleared my throat, determined not to let her appearance get the better of me. I'm glad we were able to help out. Nick did all the hard work though. He attempted a nod, but was so tired he nearly fell asleep from the effort. "Please let me know if I can repay you in any way. I can offer my services to either of you if you'd like," she said, her hands fiddling with the edge of her sweater. Maru noticed my reaction after he walked over, a sly smile over his face. "Oh, so she does it for you." I would have punched him, but Babette did it for me. She slammed her fist so hard into his stomach it knocked him over. I smiled when she turned around, appearing embarrassed by her sibling. "You are cute, but I really need to refuse. We're just glad that you're alive, and I would rather not do that sort of thing because the other person thinks they owe me. And Nikki doesn't do that sort of thing at all," I explained, and she appeared relieved by my answer. "If you need anything, please call me. I'll do my best to help out." I had gained another phone number and a new friend. She also wanted Nick to have her number, so we wrote it down on one of his notepads that had fallen out of his suit pocket when she put it on earlier. I let her leave to get checked over and cleared to head home after a very long and stressful day. As far as I could tell, she wouldn't be in trouble for anything that happened. Her victims, as it were, all consented to the acts. She was under a spell that controlled her, and the one who cast it had already died. Nearly dying herself was punishment enough. I sat down next to Nick, jacket and notebook in hand. He was a bit more awake, so I placed both items on his lap. "Did you think to make all of these flowers?" I gestured towards the park, which was now covered in golden sunlight that matched the flowers perfectly. "I don't remember. They feel familiar, but I am unaware of why, though I know I was the cause of them," he said, voice still weak. I should let him get some rest. Nick was distracted and looked from between where Babette was speaking to some agents and back towards myself. "Is that the reason why you've rejected so many advances?" My love life was the last thing I ever expected Nick to ever care about. I stiffened, never noticing just how many girls I've passed on. In my mind, they all were just being friendly and not actual options. And even if they were, most I didn't even consider because of the not owing me something rule. Aside from all that, it was strange Nick had brought it up. Was he worried somehow? For the most part, yeah. But I also don't really have time for dating. I'm trying to keep up with my own pie, company, and doing cases with you. That's not a bad thing either. I'm just not looking for a girlfriend right now. And even if I did get one, I'm not going to cut you out. To borrow an offensive turn of phrase, bros before hoes and all that. I'm not certain what that means, he admitted. I needed to find an empty page of his notebook to write it down and the meaning behind it. To get the topic off myself, I held up the closed book to ask about it. "Why do you make so many notes anyway?" He looked up, trying to figure out how to phrase his next statement. "After my first partner died, I lost a lot of my memories. My head is still scattered and I doubt I'll ever recover my past. I wanted to never lose anything important like that again if I could help it." His tone and words made the small notebook feel as if it was 100 pounds. The object was suddenly so precious it was almost hard holding onto it. The pages were worn and its cover was faded, showing it was an older one. I could only imagine what he'd written down inside. You can look inside if you want. I was startled by how easily he gave me permission. Here I was, holding something that gave an extremely deep insight into who he was. I would have thought he would feel that looking through it was an invasion of his privacy. I desperately wanted to know more about my partner, so with slightly trembling hands, I flipped open to one of the front pages. The single word neatly written a while ago pulled a direction I never would have expected. On the page, with nothing else written on it, was just cheese, nothing else. My face cracked into a smile, and I was unable to stop myself from snorting out a laugh. There was no way I would ever understand what possessed Nick to write that down. He was a little offended by my reaction and calmly took the book away, then tried to hide peeking inside to see what I found so funny. Not understanding in the slightest. I would never be trusted with that book again. We were called over to fill out a report and go over the case. Nick found he was unable to stand up. His odd power had unknown side effects every time he used it. The other agent agreed to let us fill out the report sitting down. I took the forms and pen because Nick's hands were still hurt. As I wrote, I wanted to mess with him a little more. I grew up in Canada, you know. We have poutines over there. It's super easy to make, but I can find a place that makes it just right. It's just fries, gravy, and cheese curds. The best are the ones that squeak. He listened, nodding along. When he thought I wasn't looking, he wrote down curds, with a shaking hand in his notebook. It took everything in me not to laugh. I paused writing the report, not knowing if I should mention Nick's other state. In the end, I needed to. But I wrote that only Abarash and Anker should read what happened, hoping whoever submitted this listen. Nick, I don't ever want to use that power again. Aside from it being unreliable, we just don't know enough about it. You can't stand. Your hands are hurt, and the last time it took you weeks before you could work again. It's not this secret weapon we can use to get out of trouble. Who knows what is going to happen to you next? My voice was serious, trying to get my point across. We got lucky this time around. What if he couldn't let himself slip into something else? Aside from all that, I simply didn't like him while he was like that. He wasn't my partner. He turned into something dangerous, an unknown weapon that could fall into the wrong hands. If I wasn't his partner, then what would a different person try and use him for? I didn't want to think of that outcome. At least Nick agreed with me. He would only ever consider using it if we were out of other options, and it would save my life. When the report was written out, he needed help getting down the path into the car to take him home. I worried about just how long he would be down for after that night. It wasn't until after I was dropped back off in front of my apartment that I realized what we had done that night. We saved a good number of lives. Somehow, I could only think of 3 of them and was glad everything turned out fine. One more case closed, a little bit more learned, and I really needed a nap.